Everybody in The Simpsons has a job, which is instantly identifiable. Homer is a safety inspector at the nuclear power plant where he works with Lenny, Carl, and is supervised by Burns and Smithers. Seymour Skinner is an elementary school principal, Wiggum is a police officer, Quimby is the mayor. Even marginal supporting characters like Comic Book Guy and Otto have identifiable professions. Furthermore, Homer Simpson occupies much of his on-screen time doing something related to work. When he's employed, he has work-related adventures or looks for ways to laze around at work. When he's unemployed, he's looking to get his job back or find some other source of income. Meanwhile, Peter Griffin has a tenuous connection to his job. He is consistently employed at the brewery starting in the 4th season, but he is less identified with his job than even someone like groundskeeper Willie. Family Guy is filled with wacky and uncharacteristic occurrences relayed through cutaway gags that place Peter and the other characters into absurd situations and untethered occupations. Why is it that these shows, which are on so many levels similar, have a split in how they establish work in their narratives? I'll elaborate on how jobs are perceived in each show, then consider several perspectives that help explain why Homer needs a job, why Peter doesn't, and conclude by suggesting how this meaning has evolved alongside work in the real world. Homer is deeply associated to his job. However, we'll start with an episode focused on a minor character that shows the broad importance of labor at The Simpsons. As a sitcom, it's important that disruptions to the continuity are reversed at the end of each episode so that each next episode has a familiar starting point. However, this episode involves a permanent shift in a character's status. Season 3, Episode 3 is When Flanders Failed, in which Ned Flanders quits his job in the pharmaceutical business to start the Leftorium, a small business specializing in left-handed items. This turns out to be highly destabilizing. Flanders struggles, eventually closing the store and having to sell his possessions. The tension reaches a peak as Homer sees the now homeless Flanders family living out of their car. When he shares his plan to move in with his sister in Capital City, there's genuine unease that Flanders, now without a job, has no place in Springfield and could actually vanish from the show entirely. Fortunately, a last-minute intervention by Homer in spreading the word restores Flanders' fortunes, and all is well. Though normalcy is restored and Flanders being a productive member of society, his occupation is permanently changed. The Leftorium becomes a fixture of the Springfield retail scene and is referenced in relation to Ned Flanders to the present day. The pilot episode of Family Guy deals with Peter Griffin losing his job, but it is not as displacing as it is even for Flanders. It is mostly a vehicle for kicking off wacky hijinks around welfare fraud. Though he worries about providing for his family, these feelings quickly tend to pass into a cutaway gag. One approach is not inherently better than the other, but is worth examining them. Considering the context in which these two animated series launched will give insight into the differing depictions of labor. The Simpsons, debuting in 1989, is both a sitcom and a cartoon. As a reference to sitcoms that preceded it, it had a familiar family structure in a typical suburban setting. The characterization of this family, however, emphasized the crude imperfection of its working-class household, a surprising but readily accepted premise during a 1980s cultural rebound from the plethora of happy, well-to-do television families. More challenging was the need to break the associations of being a cartoon. As the first primetime animated series since the Flintstones, its peers since the 1960s were Saturday morning children's animation. To reach a broad audience and upend the idea that cartoons could only be for children, it was important to forgo many familiar cartoon idioms. Co-creator James L. Brooks emphasizes this as a specific goal.
The big effort of this show is to stop people thinking cartoon.
It was important that, on a basic level, characters sustained realistic injury and their eyeballs stayed inside their heads. The lack of a laugh track also defied animation conventions. This is illustrated by Itchy and Scratchy, the cartoon within a cartoon, which portrays an extreme parody of cartoon violence to further distance itself from what The Simpsons was not. The creators also sought to provide emotional realism.
We do very cartoony things, but we also try for a level of emotional reality and make people forget they're watching a cartoon.
Through their sincere trials and failures, The Simpsons became more real than live-action sitcoms. The cast of characters have detailed internality and motivations that serve as more than just vehicles to deliver quippy one-liners or the overall lesson of an episode. This is one reasoning for the fixed job for Homer. An occupation is an important source of motivation and identity, especially for the patriarch of a suburban household. To maintain a connection to the working-class fathers and sitcoms that came before it, and give the show realistic texture to the household's money problems and sense of everyday life, it is natural to have Homer hold down a job, and frequently show him at the workplace or thinking about work. This extends to the well-defined careers of the supporting cast. Animation permits extending the tapestry of suburban life beyond just the central family to a wide cast of recurring characters that would be challenging to maintain in live action. Groening wanted to make use of this ability to create a whole world. On Cartoon Realism, Alison Crawford writes of The Simpsons, "The supporting cast with durable roles creates a sense of realism, of there being a living town of Springfield which carries on regardless of what the Simpson family is up to." The role of occupation in The Simpsons stems from its desires to balance continuity and discontinuity with the two genres it combines, the sitcom and the animated series. Family Guy is fundamentally the same pairing, so why the different approach? I think the key difference is that it launched in 1999 into a post-Simpsons world further removed from earlier sitcoms and where cartoons as adult animation was already legitimated, allowing it to have its own characteristic brand of humor and different approach to constructing its world. Seth McFarlane was a student at the Rhode Island School of Design studying animation when The Simpsons debuted and changed his career.
I started to kind of rethink things and thought, they've kind of rewritten the rule book. Suddenly I'm watching a cartoon that actually is making me laugh. It's for me as an adult. This changes the game. These the kind of humor that makes me laugh and the stuff that I was doing in my stand-up routines could now maybe meld with animation. And so that show was instrumental in altering my trajectory.
Television trends in the mid-90s created an opportunity for more adult animation. Broadcast television was facing greater competition from cable, which targeted narrower niches of television viewers. Young men, adults, and teens were valuable in large audience segments, and Family Guy presented humor that was successful with this demographic. Its specific format of cutaway gags and varied cultural references successfully provided more unpredictable and attention-grabbing programming that could compete with a proliferation of media formats, especially digital video platforms. Though it's hard to imagine now, Fox Television was at this time a relatively young upstart as a network channel, being founded in 1986 to compete with the big three networks that had decades of history broadcasting since the very beginnings of television. Targeting a younger demographic and taking a risk with cutting-edge media forms was part of a strategy that helped to become wildly successful, matching or even exceeding the viewership of the other networks. Just like The Simpsons needed classic television sitcoms and children's cartoons as a reference point, Family Guy needed The Simpsons to put into relief its unrestrained comedic style. Whereas realistic elements of The Simpsons were used to both relate the show to existing sitcom forms and stage that genre for satire, Family Guy uses its mundane suburban environment as a springboard that contrasts the fantastical things that happen. This helps us contextualize the role of labor in the world of Quahog. In The Simpsons, in order to create grounded plots and interactions, the job itself is important. In Family Guy, you need merely the idea of a job. Recall that McFarlane wanted to pitch a cartoon that could utilize the types of jokes he was telling during his stand-up sets, a format which is usually very non-linear and not reliant on a fixed identity for the comedian. To convey the highly referential, often non-narrative humor, Peter Griffin and the other cast members detach from a fixed identity, appearing just as naturally in their supposed actual job in a given episode as in any other unpredictable occupation in time and space. These two shows therefore establish competing visions for real work. Greg Sharzer, in his analysis of labor representations in The Simpsons, write that the show originally presented, both directly and satirically, a Fordist model of work. The model is that workers organized correctly will be able to perform their jobs, which give them a sound financial and social basis to participate in the economy and the world. The Simpsons parodies this through Homer's incompetence and Burns' undue mistreatment, but implicitly through the sitcom structure also reinforces this model of work as the only one in existence, and the apex to which a low-skilled worker such as Homer Simpson can hope for. Sharzer argues that later Simpsons departs from this familiar model of work, depicting instead far-fetched adventures and plotlines. I think this is even more visible with the setting of Family Guy. Crucially, The Simpsons, especially in its earlier seasons, through its narrative emphasis on Homer's side of work, makes it into a real workplace. It's an aspect of his life that contains its own storylines. There, Homer can make friends, develop skills, and explore different career paths, and participate in collective labor action. Meanwhile, Family Guy reflects new instabilities of work. In Quahog, it's a pilot episode, we see the gig economy, where workers provide labors in bizarre cutaway gag-style occupations with no storylines and no lasting bearing on the rest of their lives, packing boxes, making deliveries, doing any type of itinerant seasonal work. The structure of Family Guy is not only postmodern, the context reflects a postmodernist view where the media environment around us, the things that we watch, the things that we don't personally watch but that circulate around us, have great influence on our lives. This is especially present given the frequent intrusion of advertising figures, traditionally outside of narrative television, into the frame of the show. Although The Simpsons places an importance on television and has many episodes following media or media figures, Family Guy takes us further by having the media environment be often more important than the traditional signifiers of identity such as family, class, and work. In The Simpsons, especially in the early seasons, a sense of realism to the social fabric of Springfield was paramount, as a way of grounding the primetime cartoon form in identifiable character motivations. Meanwhile, Family Guy was focused on evolving a more fast-paced presentation style to appeal to a more media-savvy audience. This perspective is fascinating for looking at other animation as well. In live action, the fundamental grounding of the characters in reality tends to demand that they have at least nominal job titles. However, thinking of just Western animated television reveals a dizzying range of approaches to work, whether it's essential to the premise, completely absent, nominally present but irrelevant, somehow both essential and irrelevant at the same time, and so forth and so forth. It's hard to even create loose categories. Each show seems to engage with work in its own unique way based on its social media context and the intention of the story. This is just an introduction through analyzing two deeply influential shows' ways of understanding the ever-evolving intersection of animation and the labor it depicts.